All right, and good morning. We're gonna go into some deep nerd stuff this morning. I'm gonna be talking about Heidegger on technology, artificial intelligence, AI and war, and the whole concept that we've essentially purchased, the panopticon and the happy machines. So I hope you guys are ready to rock and roll. Let's do a little something. And good morning. Good morning. Okay, so I was reading an article this morning, and I'm gonna be upfront with you. We're not gonna make it through this article. It's too long and too dense, and for any of you in the audience that don't have a degree in philosophy, I'm gonna have to pause and discuss the pieces of it quite a bit. But I think it's an interesting and important topic, and I'm going to start with quite a bit of preface, including some anecdotes before we even get to the article. But the thrust of the article is in reference to Heidegger on technology and this quote, "Only a God can save us." Now, that language, "only a God can save us," in reference to the use of the indefinite article with respect to the word God, to be clear, for at least the purposes of this conversation, I am not interested in the particular identity of God, whether that be the Judeo-Christian, the Islamic, what have you. I don't even care if you want to reference to one of several gods in a polytheistic pantheon. The important part of the conversation for the purposes of this philosophical endeavor is that the atheist is always wrong, and that quite simply, as a categorical, existential, and ontological position, there is something which occupies the absolute pinnacle and origin of existence. There is a thing, no matter how you identify or understand it, in its identity, there is something which occupies the hierarchical position of pinnacle. There is an absolute topmost starting point, just as there must be an absolute nadir existentially within the realm of what can be understood. Not what we do understand, but what can be understood to be included in our general ontology, right? There must be a nadir and there must be a peak. Otherwise, you're just stacking turtles all the way down, right? The world is constructed on the back of a giant turtle which swims through space. Well, where's the turtle? What is the turtle? Oh, it's on the back of a bigger turtle. Well, then where's that turtle? Well, it's just turtles all the way down. You see, your explanation is it's worse than reductive. It's overly expansive, and it just continues to fall down. Now, you'll notice that the first comment on the Rumble side, and because Pit Danny had first blood this morning, the second comment on everybody else's is a link to thecollector.com, and that is the link to this article on technology. So, a little background. I want to give you some understanding of who Heidegger is in the world of philosophy, and I'm going to do that with an anecdote and a brief recitation of some of his work. So, I have here the Solomon Existentialism collection, which is often used for intro to existentialism in academic study. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from Sein und Zeits, or Being and Time, which is the most famous, the most well-known, and the most importantly studied work of Martin Heidegger, who, by the way, is one of my favorite philosophers. He was an absolutely brilliant philosopher. But Heidegger is one of the hardest philosophers to read, one of the most difficult philosophers to read, largely because the concepts that he dealt with were so novel and so complex that in most of his writing, he is forced essentially to make up words. And he was not a linguist, and he was certainly no philologist. And so in attempting to describe novel concepts, Heidegger had a bad habit of using long compound words like substantial thingliness, the given-to-edness, the ready-to-handedness of things, and how the ready-to-handedness of objects in relation to conceptual understanding defines not only what the conceptual understanding of the object is, but what the concept itself is, and whether or not you have the philosophical, intellectual, and ontological capacity to even recognize, let alone understand, the objects. A good example of what Heidegger argues when he talks about the thingliness of objects is to reference back to when ships first came to the what would eventually become the United States. There were native tribes that reported not even seeing the ships on the horizon because they were things that they didn't understand, and so because they saw objects in the distance to whose thingliness, to whose objective quality, to whose purpose and intent they had no frame of reference, they were unable even to perceive the existence of the objects in the distance. A classic example that Heidegger uses, and I've even talked about on the show, is you can't understand a pen, right? A human being can understand what a pen is without first also understanding what is paper, what are marking surfaces, what is the written language, why a person might want to record language, how language is recorded, in what way does this contribute to that, and what is the relationship of this object to those various and complex concepts, which you must acquire in relation to other varied and complex concepts before you're even able to begin to perceive that this thing exists, let alone understand what it is. That's the kind of shit that Heidegger writes. It's dense, it's complex, it's brilliant. And if I'm being perfectly fair, in the function of application, it's utterly irrelevant to most people unless what you intend to do is explore a deeper understanding of your ability to affect the world around you with the purpose of expanding the ability to affect the world around you and then make substantial active changes to functioning reality. And when I talk about substantial active changes to the function of reality, I'm not talking about some sick shit where we're going to pretend like men can be women and we're going to mutilate children and we're going to caustically re-articulate the use of language and vocabulary and vernacular for the purpose of perverting the understanding of perceived reality. I'm talking about understanding the way that the individual components of reality relate to one another so that you can engage in and begin creative processes like the introduction of capitalism as a conceptual object, which will reduce the rate of poverty and starvation in the world by the mere dint of its existence and acceptance as a concept dramatically. So that gives you kind of a why one might want to understand Heidegger. And I'm going to read you a brief excerpt, and I want to be very clear. In the context of this conversation, we are not taking the time to dissect and understand what I'm about to read to you. I'm about to read it to you to make the point about the density and complexity of the writings of Martin Heidegger. This is from the theme of the analytic of Dasein. Dasein is the being, the existential entity that is represented by a concept or physical manifestation of reality. And he says, the being whose analysis our task is always we ourselves. The being of this being is always mine. In the being of this being, it is related to its being. As the being of this being, it is entrusted to its own being. It is being about which this being is concerned. From this characteristic of Dasein, two things follow. The essence of this being lies in its to be. The whatness, exsentia, of this being must be understood in terms of its being, extensia, insofar as we can speak of it at all. And believe it or not, that is not circular logic. To the extent that any of you followed that, Heidegger and Kierkegaard are similar in philosophically in this regard, where they talk about the nature of a being, in particular, a cognizant, sapient, and thinking being. That it exists is in part a function of its ability to understand that it exists. It's sort of the argument that the difference between consciousness, sapience, and sentience has to do with self-awareness. But again, I'm not going to go deep into dissecting that particular piece. So anecdotally, when I was studying philosophy academically and actually in a college studying philosophy, I had a professor, and he was one of my favorites. Unfortunately, Professor Doff has passed away. He was already bound to a wheelchair. I don't remember what his particular condition was. It wasn't he didn't have the same degenerative condition as the wheelchair guy that invented time, but he was in pretty rough shape when I knew him, and then he passed away. But he was a brilliant philosopher, a brilliant professor, and I like to think of him as a pretty good friend. But when he was younger, when he was a student, and before he was stuck in a wheelchair, and anecdotally, Professor Dopf went and studied in Germany, studied philosophy in Germany. And he told us this story. He was super excited. He got to Germany. He had learned German. His German was impeccable. It was excellent. He spoke it almost as well as his native English. And he joined a German philosophy club, and he showed up to the first meeting at the beer garden with his copy of Being and Time, Heidegger's seminal work in its original German. So, the cover said Sein und Seits. And he shows up to the German club with all the German philosophy students and a couple of German, native German-speaking philosophy professors. Everybody there, except for Professor Toff, were native German speakers. At a German philosophy club in a German beer garden to study the works of a famous German philosopher, and he showed up with his copy of the book in German, and they laughed at him. And the professor said, no, nobody tries to read Heidegger in the original German. And it's a rough way. It's hard. So if you don't speak German, if you don't know much about German, just kind of the way German works, you wear shoes on your feet and you wear handshoes on your hand, right? It's not a glove, it's a handshoe. And German words tend to be that way, stacks and stacks of words. So imagine what the language looks like when you're dealing with a pseudo-philologist who's a brilliant philosopher attempting to use compound words in order to describe complex concepts in a language where compound words are unnecessarily extended. It's nightmare fuel for even the highest level intellectuals, and they don't even bother with it because the language translation from German to English is so good. Where does this put us on technology and artificial intelligence? Heidegger had rather a lot to say about technology with relation to our ability to understand technology, as I described a moment ago with the example of the pen. You can't understand this if you don't already understand writing and all that. Crackshot points out English is very similar to German. In fact, yes, English is a Germanic language in the same way that Spanish, Italian, French, Basque, Portuguese, etc. are Romance languages. Despite the similarities that you may perceive in your language to Spanish, for example, if you ever have a conversation with a native Spanish-speaking Mexican who has adopted a great deal of Spanglish, of that kind of pigeonized Spanglo-English linguistic, the fact is that English is essentially German with a different grammar structure. But the words that you seem to understand, that you seem to recognize in the Romance languages from English are what we call loan words. Like, for example, there's no Korean word for computer, it's computo. Similarly with Spanish, it's computadore. Right, so those are loan words. The technology is created and exists in the region of the primary language, and then the rest of the world, instead of making up a word in their language, they just localize the original linguistic nomenclature, and that's perfectly acceptable and a very, very common practice. The word kiosk, the little cart shops in the mall, the word kiosk is literally the Russian word for cart, because that's where the concept of the cart, the push cart, pop-up shopping post comes from, is from Russia. So Heidegger, only a God can save us. Heidegger on technology. This article will explore Heidegger's views on technology and how we see the world. What does technology become when we stop thinking about it as a means to an end? Just that sentence, right? Just that sentence in the context of discussing Heidegger is a little tricky to get through. Heidegger thought that the answer to this question, which put another way asks what technology is when we stop thinking about it technologically, explains the essence of technology. Non-technological thinking is at least as important for Heidegger as actually understanding what the essence of technology is. So, one of the principal concepts I talked about, thingliness, the thingliness of this object, the pen, has to do with your ability to understand it. But because this is a tool, another major factor in your ability to understand and relate to this being, you are a being, this is a being, and the relationship that you have to this being is itself an entity. And in order for you to have a useful relationship with a tool, the tool must have what Heidegger referred to as ready-to-handedness. And he used that language. He was very clear on it, that he used the language ready-to-handedness instead of describing the actual efficient capacity of the tool, because what that efficient capacity is changes so dramatically from tool to tool. But that efficient capacity, which he referred to as ready-to-handedness, has itself a common factor, a common essence, which is shared across all tools in that way. So with back to the pen example, you notice the pen least, you are least aware of the pen when you are using it and it is doing its job well and correctly. The example that Heidegger normally used to describe was the use of a knife when you're cutting vegetables, for example, with a sharp kitchen knife. You don't really think of the knife. You pick it up and you use it, and it just does what it does. It is when the knife is dull or pitted or dirty even, and you have to stop and clean the knife, you have to stop and sharpen the knife, or if you continue to use the knife without stopping and sharpening it, it does its job poorly. And in that, you become more and more aware of the tool. Crackshot says you and the pen become one, right? A person, this is well illustrated with firearms. For any of you who are not familiar with firearms, and when I say not familiar, I mean you have not trained, you have not made a habit of carrying, you have not educated yourself on the proper care and maintenance, you've never taken it out on a battlefield, engaged in combat with the enemy, never taken a life with a firearm. You have a very, very different relationship with any firearm than somebody who has done all of those things, right? You'll often hear soldiers, warriors, refer to their weapon as a part of themselves. Your weapon very much becomes a part of you. When I came back from Afghanistan, for months after I came back, I would occasionally, and I still do every now and then, if I'm being honest, every now and then I will wake up in a cold sweat and a mild panic when, on waking, I realize that I'm not hugging a rifle, that I don't have a rifle on my body, that I wake up not holding a rifle. It doesn't happen often anymore. It hits me every now and then. It never happened while I was deployed because I did not once fall asleep without that I was holding a loaded, ready-to-fire rifle. It was just a part of my life. It was a part of me. That's the ready-to-handedness piece. Now, so that's the kind of perspective and intellectual relationship with objects and tools that Heidegger's talking about in there. See what I mean? We're 23 minutes in, and I've only gotten through the first paragraph of the article. I just might have to come back to this one. So Heidegger theorized in parts of his work, most explicitly stated in a series of lectures including The Question Concerning Technology, that technology is not just a category that describes certain trains of scientific thought or types of devices. Technology is also not the exclusive province of modernity. Rather, Heidegger proposed that technology is a mode of revealing, a framework in which things reveal themselves in their capacity as instrumental objects, as resources. This process of revealing for Heidegger is just as important for 20th century technology as it was for the simplest tools from early human history. So hopefully many of you have seen the film, The Gods Must Be Crazy. It's a comedy, right? And in The Gods Must Be Crazy, an airplane flies over an uncontacted African tribe. I think it's African. It might be South American, but it really doesn't matter. It's a tribe of people who have never met a white man and don't speak English, don't speak any language that you've ever heard of. I think for the purpose, I think the language that they spoke in the film was made up by the film by a flippin' conlang philologist. But the point, this small airplane flies over and he throws a Coke bottle out the window and it lands on this uncontacted tribe that has not developed glass, right? They don't understand what They certainly don't understand what the symbols on the Coca-Cola bottle are. You know, it's one of the old school glass Coca-Cola bottles with the embossed logo on the side of it. He pitches it over, and they find it. Well, it's cylindrical, it's hard, right? It's an object that they don't understand, right? They have drinking vessels, right? They have vessels for containing liquid, but they're a primitive tribe, so they don't have bottles with a bottleneck, right, with a small opening that's meant to make it easier to pour. That technology hasn't entered their lexicon yet, right? It's like Native Americans before the white man landed. They didn't have the wheel. That's something that they had to acquire in trade. So all the drinking vessels, all the liquid vessels are like this coffee cup. They're basically uniform size from top to bottom. And so the tribe uses the bottle as a hammer. They use it as a milling stone to grind grain on a larger concave rock. They start to explore and experiment with the way that it refracts light, and looking down one side of it or looking through the side of it, looking down one end. They don't understand what the thing is, and since they don't understand it in the way that I earlier described the ability to understand a pen based on its utilitarian context, then they start to imagine ways in which the bottle is useful. And it doesn't only become useful in those ways, but their understanding of it defines the identity of it in that context. And it ceases, for all intents and purposes, to be a bottle, and rather becomes whatever tool it is that the culture finds useful in that context based on their own contextual understanding of the object. To this extent, it is in fact true that reality is subjective. Now, what is subjective of reality in this context is the identity, the utility, right? The meaning of the tool. What is not subjective, however, what is absolutely objective in reality is that the thing exists. Now, it may be that the intent of the original creator of the object is X, and absent that contextual understanding of the object, the value becomes Y, and there is subjectivity in reality. Right? But the fact of the thing's existence does not change. Now, there's a whole rabbit hole I can go down on the gender identity question with this, and I'm going to do it briefly. What is objectively true is the biological and physical composition of individual humans upon birth. In fact, upon conception. At the very moment of conception, biological objective reality has been determined. For the baby choppers to make their arguments about the subjectivity of reality with regard to identity, in gender identity and expression, it is required that the objective reality of the subject be altered externally and irrevocably. The bottle found by the uncontacted tribe gets used as a grindstone, gets used as a hammer, right? But while it has hard corners, durability, and is unyielding to the minimal pressure sufficient to grind the seeds into powders and pastes, it is never used as a knife. It has no sharp edges. Now, if you were to break the bottle it would then have sharp edges, and identity could make it a knife, but only after having taken external, violent, and irreparable action to alter the base physical nature of the object, can it assume that additional identity which was not previously available to it. You have altered its existential position in your ontological universe. That difference requires violent external coercive force. Oh. So, it's 8 o'clock, guys. I'm not going to stop right now, but quite simply, I think this is going to have to be a much longer conversation. Let me get through just a little bit more of this, and then I'm going to put a pin in this, and we're going to have to come back to this one. This might be one where I just take a day and say, yo, I'm just going to talk until I'm done, until I'm tired of it. And I hope I hope a few of you can join me for a run like that, because quite simply, I can literally do this for hours without stopping, as long as I strap on a diaper and have a coffee pot on the table, right? So, Heidegger theorized a part of his work that technology is also not the exclusive province of modernity. Heidegger is just as important. This process of revealing for Heidegger is just as important for 20th century technology as it was for the simplest tools from early human history, right? The knife to the computer. There is, however, a significant difference between ancient and modern technology for Heidegger. While the windmill brings forth energy from natural phenomena, it is essentially at the mercy of those phenomena. It allows them to reveal their own instrumental potential. By contrast, and here we see the source of Heidegger's prominence in contemporary ecological thought, Heidegger sees modern technology as challenging nature, demanding that it supply energy that can be extracted and stored as such. For Heidegger, the defining behavior of modern technology is extraction, its tendency to challenge the land to reveal itself as a particular kind of useful resource. In Heidegger's parlance, technology is a mode of revealing things that sets upon nature and restructures it according to human demands for resources. How is that? This is a whole nother rabbit hole worth going down. That is a good way also to understand the difference between political conservatism and political progressivism. Progressivism demands that other people supply energy that can be extracted from them and stored as such. That energy normally is represented in the storage medium and tabulation counter of currency, or some equivalent representational counter of wealth. But wealth is not different than time or energy or resources. It is simply a counter of your access to those things. So, like I said, this is going to be one where I have to come back to it again and expand on this particular article. So going to have to be a playlist out of this one, and for real, this is a long and excellent article, and I'm actually really much looking forward to reading this whole article a couple more times. I very much enjoyed this. So thanks for tuning in this morning, guys. Let me know in the comments, if you haven't already, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe buttons, follow, share, all that good stuff. Help us out. I would honestly rather spend my time on this show doing content like this than the more political content that we've been doing as the mainstay for the last year or so. Couple of years, really. We got we trended much more into political news in 2020 and have kind of been stuck on that. I would much rather explore the complex philosophical stuff, which I'll remind you relates a lot to politics generally. And let me know in the comments, guys, is that something that interests you? Is this something that interests you? Is this a once a month type of show? Is this a once a week type of show? Let me know what you guys think, what you guys want, and I will do my best to give you what you're looking for. But if I'm being honest, at the end of the day, the thing that I'm really looking for with this show, it'd be great to grow the show so big that, I shut down all my other projects and stop leaving the house and just sit here and get fat and talk to you guys and make $1 billion off of ad revenue and t-shirts and merch and shit. But really, the thing that I want from this show is I want to sit down for half an hour, have a cup of coffee, and talk to some of my good friends and family. Most of you that watch the show now, make no bones about it, are family and friends. And I love that. And I appreciate the hell out of you guys joining us. And there are those among you who I've never met in real life. I've never met in person. I don't even know your real name, never seen your face. Unverified Bear, I'm 99% sure we've never met. We don't know each other. But, Jen D, there are several people that watch the show that we may never meet in person. I hope we do. That would be awesome. But you still feel like friends because you interact substantially in the chat. When you guys are interacting substantially in the chat, we're communicating, we're having a conversation, and many of you, especially the ones I mentioned, like Jen, Crackshot, Unverified Bear, who I don't know personally, we have developed a very basic but friendly and positive relationship, and I appreciate the hell out of you guys for that. So that was the Thursday show. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.